This is the Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.
What's up, Morgan?
Hey, we did it.
We did it.
I've never done this before.
Yeah, I'm happy to take your Instagram live virginity. That's been the case with a lot of these
Oh
people
yeah,
I've
yeah.
been talking to.
That's nice. Yeah, admittedly, I'm not. I've been wanting to get more acquainted with the Instagram Live deal, but I just haven't done too much homework about it yet.
Cool. You've been doing a lot of live performances, right? But through like Facebook mostly.
Facebook, I mean, it's kind of a daisy chain of programs. It's like I'm working with these guys, VUC, that have very rapidly rolled out this free 100% of the proceeds go to artists platform. And
Oh,
the way we
cool.
did it, because I wanted to try to cast a wide net, was we're using OBS and Restream to
Hmm.
send the performances to multiple platforms. So we have it going through Vimeo, Facebook, YouTube, and um, trying to get Instagram in there, but I think there's an extra step or something. Yeah.
Now, I looked into that when I was starting to do these, and unfortunately, Instagram isn't on those lists of different platforms that can be streamed through that. But
It's
yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah, it is unfortunate because I think that it's kind of like an untapped, demographic, and it's an underutilized platform, and it's been
Oh
really
yeah,
cool to do these.
I agree.
But yeah, man, it's an honor to be speaking with you. I've been a
Oh,
big fan for a really long time. I'll put you at ease with just some compliments first. Yeah, like I love your music, love
oh,
everything you
thanks.
do. I think I saw you perform the first time in maybe 2012. It was at Cloud Nine in Berkeley, and it was
Oh,
like a Satyuga event with
that was a
I think Dogon Lights and Dirtwire played or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah. That was a special night. I'm glad you were there because that was one of the most impressive environments. I remember walking in there and they had told me what they were setting up, and then when I saw it, I was just breathtaking.
Yeah,
It was like floor to ceiling with all of this incredible iconography and artifact and objects from all over the world. And yeah, cool. That's nice to know
yeah,
that you were there.
yeah. That was amazing, and I kind of ended up there just by chance. I didn't
Uh,
even see any kind of event flyer or anything like that. I was just curious about what was going on at Cloud Nine, and sometimes I would just pop by there to see what events were happening. And
nice.
that was I think my first time there, and it was just yeah amazing.
So is Cloud9 still a thing, or what was it? Was
Now,
it like an art collective, or?
I don't know. I haven't been in the Bay Area now for a while, but
Hmm,
last time I was there, it wasn't really happening. I mean, you know that all the kind of Satyuga people kind of migrated over to
right.
the ghost ship warehouse, and that was tragic
Oh
with
yeah,
what happened. So that was kind of like the remnants of what that era of Cloud Nine at least used to be.
got it.
But that was definitely like a special portal for creativity and culture within the Bay Area at that time. It was amazing.
That's to me the tragedy of it really is what really was. It seemed like a really wonderful um, thing. Uh, just got ruined. I don't know how else to put it, but it was just the you know to me. I remember going to the ghost ship because they wanted me to do a show there, and I was walking around, and I mean, of course, the environment was stunningly beautiful, but I also remember seeing all of these red flags. Had to climb up a pallet staircase to get to the main performance room, and it was just me and Derek and a few others, and I was getting lost, because of the way they had built it. I mean, it was beautiful. It reminded me of something you might see in India,
Right.
the way in which they designed it and built it, and that sort of DIY visionary aesthetic is really um, inspiring. But at the same time, it's like, well, I don't know. I got bad feelings about this,
Mm.
you know. But at its best, because I try to see the good in things, it seemed like what they were trying to do was create platforms for people like ourselves to create meaningful and lasting experiences. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about that immersive environment. It's like you can have an experience of just a musical artist playing at some random venue, but
yeah,
it's kind of like then the music gets extended out into the environment and it
yes,
becomes a full immersive experience where you're inside of this world. And when I've seen
yes,
you perform at not just that one event at Cloud9, but you also played in some of their other stages, like at Symbiosis and stuff like that. There's something with that aesthetic and how that translates to the vibe of your music and what you're conducting and that energy that you're moving that's really powerful.
mm, yeah. There was certainly an intensity and a rawness of vision that complemented, and I didn't really know them either. That was the other funny thing about it was my manager at the time booked me for a number of different spaces and found myself in that place. I think the first one I did was at Symbiosis in 2012, and it was around 4 in the morning. And I remember looking around like, my God, where did this stuff come from? This is amazing. Same thing with the Cloud9 deal. And I think, just as an artist, I've always been in love with world building. And so the way in which they intricately design and consider those environments really appeal to that. And I love those kinds of, it felt to me like a shared story in that regard, where they were bringing their aesthetic and then I was bringing what I do, and it just
Mhm.
danced together really nicely.
Yeah, that's something I really appreciate about what you do too, is that it's so full spectrum. There's a lot of amazing musicians, but it's kind of like isolated to just the music.
Hmm.
But what you do, how it's interwoven with theater and with story and with visual art, you create a real immersive experience that kind of tunes into all the different senses.
Yes.
And that's really unique and really amazing. I'm curious, kind of all those different kinds of art forms that you're tapping into. Do you have a history with all of those, or what was the process that led to
Yeah.
you kind of building up with all those different things?
Well, the short answer was it's what felt the most true. Um, when I began to really hold the question in my mind, why do I need to make art? I was beginning a degree in fine arts with a very entrepreneurial program at a Florida State, where they basically gave you a studio space and they didn't teach you technique or anything, just good luck. We'll check in and tell you what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but growing up, when I look back at 2 years old, I was singing and making beats. I was inspired by things like Star Wars and Star Trek, and grew up on all of that stuff, and was in love with the worlds that they were building, the backstories, the mythologies, the environments. And as a young kid, my siblings and I were always world building in the woods where we lived in Florida. So it was like we had this toy chest of all these random things that my parents collected, and we would invent these narratives out of those objects. And so when it came to addressing this why do I need to make art, it was, well, this is what actually makes me feel good. And I was processing a lot of familial stuff at that time. And so taking that firsthand experience with my family members, my mother, her siblings, my dad, grandfathers, and alchemizing it by way of storytelling, that's what felt good. It was exciting. It was a way to process the anxiety and the inspiration. And I think I began working on House of Stone right around the time September 11th happened.
Mhm.
And that event in the same, I think within a month, my grandfather died, and that was a huge dramatic event in my mother's family. They'd had a very tumultuous relationship with that guy, and so there was a lot of like a feeling of compulsion to look at that paternal line, my own dad, his blunders, his beauty, my grandfather, and so House of Stone was looking at that on a very insular environment, and then looking at it as it, layered out into community, nation, world. So I don't know. I think growing up too, I really wanted to be a filmmaker for the better part of my formative years. But I wanted to do something that was beyond just making a movie. It's like I wanted to be able to create something that blurred the lines between cinematic experience and theater and art gallery and music. And when you walk in, you're asking the question, what is this? And that to me was the sweet spot that felt the most exciting.
Mm.
And on that topic of all those mediums, so much of the time you see people doing it, but a lot of it feels very arbitrary, like they're doing it just because they can. And I really wanted to try to be careful with that. And if I had an orchestra backing a band, or if there was a visual component that was complementing the music, really wanted to be conscientious of that whole thing feeling really cohesive, like they had time to really marinate together. And somebody who was an inspiration on that point was Bjork. I feel like she's always done a really lovely job of mixing mediums and presenting the work that she did. So she was an inspiration in those years. So anyway, yeah, going back to the short answer, it just felt the most true.
Mm.
I wasn't ever really identified as a musician. It's like when people would say he's a musician, in the back of my mind is kind of. Um, you know, I don't even know what I am. Maybe just the word artist, but
Yeah.
even that, it's like this whole process extends into, the mundane aspects of life too.
Hmm.
Um, you know,
Yeah, I appreciate that you kind of stand alone as just an artist, where it's hard to pin you down into one particular discipline. You know, I think people sometimes attach too much value to one particular art form. They become like a
right.
great painter, a great guitarist, and that's cool. I really appreciate
Sure.
specialists because they become virtuosos at whatever they do.
Yes.
But there's something I also appreciate about people that it's kind of like their creativity, that's the value.
Right.
It's not so much about, because it's all, I guess, art forms are all different forms of storytelling.
Hmm.
So you've just kind of isolated the story as the most important element, and then all the different art forms kind of conform around that to enhance that story.
Hmm.
I'm
Yes.
curious, I'm curious, were you into like progressive rock or anything? Because I feel like the concept album, like the narrative story through music, it does kind of have these roots in like 1970s prog rock. Like, I don't, were you ever into like Vondergraaf Generator or anything like that?
To be quite honest with you, I grew up under a rock.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I've been exposed to, a lot of it happened retroactively. Um, Growing up, we were very sheltered. And so the stuff that I was exposed to was either classical music or world music. And I think the first stuff that I really fell in love with was bands like Nine Inch Nails. I remember being 7 or 8 and hearing Head Like a Hole in the radio. I was like, what is that? That sounds awesome. Uh, and so I think in a roundabout sort of way, I was inspired to do that stuff, not knowing about what had come before, but perhaps all that informed work I liked as a kid. And then, that's the other thing I think is doing the homework. It's like digging deeper, like, okay, who's done it before? And then looking and seeing and exposing yourself to what other people are doing so you can more authentically find your place in the spectrum of what's been done. Um, Going back to this idea of mastery, and then um, not focusing on one thing or not. There's a lot of, I have so much love for the Japanese culture historically because of the way in which the whole thing was about practicing one thing as an extension of your honing of spirit. And I think the other big inspiration was etymology of spirit, etymology of meaning, um, identities, uh, archetypes. And so with all of this stuff, I'd go through phases of being a sponge, and a lot of the work that really inspired me at the time that I began working were things like finding like the soundtrack for the movie Akira. I remember hearing those voices and I'm like, what is that? What is it? And then I really dug to figure out who was doing the music and found this entire catalog of stuff by this Japanese collective that had been commissioned to do that film. But they had all this other work. They were doing covers of African folk songs. Um, Where'd they find that work? Then going in that down that wormhole. Um, and I think that's something that really the process of discovery is a huge component to all of this. It's like, and that's something that I took away from the art program I was in. It's like, okay, good, dig deeper. And I think that's how we can also more compassionately and conscientiously address things like cultural appropriation. I think when I really meditated on that idea in conversation with people, really the misstep is that we haven't done enough homework on why it is we're inspired by that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like earning knowledge, seeking and earning the knowledge, and then taking that in and letting it inform the work, not fighting that. Because, I mean, come on, since the beginning of human consciousness, we're always borrowing from other, because we're social creatures, right? We're inspired by one another, sharing of stories. Seeing something you do sparks an idea. Oh man, and that kind of critical thinking conversation is the most vital part for me. Um, the creative expression, the thing that comes of it, if it's a painting or a drawing or a song, that's almost like the honey, the byproduct of this process.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm.
so,
It's
yes,
the ash of the burning flame of the spirit. It's like
yeah,
that's
totally.
ephemeral, and you can't directly communicate that, but you can kind of like cast this shadow through the art that you create, and other people can experience that.
No doubt. Yeah. And to me, that's the thing. I think right now, I had a friend who's an animator with Disney say once that he believe it's like, they talk about Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, that whole thing. And his comment was, I believe we're in an age of the kindred quest where many of us have, you know, gone through our process. We've slayed our dragon, and now we see one another like we're doing here, and we're sharing our experience. And that's the stuff that I'm most excited about these days. It's like I've spent years in my little studio working on the ideas, working through, internal landscape and history and trauma and all that. And I have something to show as a result. And so I feel like going back to this thing of inspiring critical thinking in others, doing the homework, this is all a part of. Let's get to a level where we're all constantly seeking, where we can have these conversations and have them creatively. Um, you know?
Mm. Yeah, that was something I was curious about too. You were talking about working through personal trauma. Like your music feels incredibly cathartic to me. And in performances I've seen you do too, it really feels like you're releasing an authentic and intense amount of emotion,
Yes.
but yet the subject of your music is much more mythological or fantastic. I'm curious how much of your music and the stories behind it are informed by your personal experiences.
Oh man, 100% inspired by personal experience. It's all I have. Uh, it goes back to that thing of looking at family members as being the immediate inspirations. Like when I was designing or writing the narrative House of Stone, I was pulling from my mother and from my brothers and sister, from my aunts, from my uncles, from my grandfather. Um, and I think that's how really what I'm drawing from is a well that we all draw from. But by pulling from those specific people, it really hones in a personability and a sort of richness of character and depth, and also allowing those characters to grow over the course of 10 or 15 years. Um, but it's sort of like it's like drawing from life. If we're trying to interpret this object from a photograph, it's going to be very different than if we're sitting there having to make the choice of how that light bounces off of the object, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like in the same way, what I was after in writing those stories is like, well, I want this to be true. I want it to feel true, like good acting, good method acting comes from a real place. You're using real catalysts to trigger those emotional responses. And it's absolutely a catharsis. Um, I didn't know who Alejandro Jodorowsky was when I started working on it. And then after I had released a lot of the work, several people talked about him. And then I just was like, oh, yeah. Well, again, here's somebody I had no idea about. But then you look at what he was doing with familial, ancestral healing, psychomagic, as he called it,
Mm-hmm.
where he's casting, a son as his father. He's casting, a sister as his mother and things like that. So he's working through these familial relationships. And to me, that's the most exciting thing we can do. Art is not just a point of entertainment. It's actually something even more than that. In my mind, it's almost like the ultimate catharsis for spirit and self. Um, and so going back to the personable nature of the work, I chose to only use two traditional instruments in a lot of the music. It was my father's first guitar, and then my grandfather's piano. When he died, it went to mom, so that was at my parents' house. And any of the piano songs I was writing, I was always writing it on that piano.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a way for me to play with that idea of thinking about these men, my relationship with them, and just loving them for who they were and who they were not. Uh, and so then live, it takes all of that stuff to a whole new level. I'm calling in that stuff, or if I'm feeling something that day, I'm just working through it by way of this process.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like a lot of the narratives in your music revolve around that theme of the father, especially that kind of the paternal influence.
Yes, it's felt true right now, and then you can look at all the stuff about the feminine age, the masculine age, and a lot of, Egyptian um, astrological calendars and things like that. Uh, that's the other part of it, is listening to where the culture's at and doing so from a place of humility. It's like that idea of what we're looking at with this masculine age we find ourselves in. This was pre Me Too movement, before any of this stuff was happening. You could feel the death rattle of this old ideology. And so the work was almost like a prophetic vision of, we have to put this to death lovingly. We have to kill the father, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to the Joseph Campbellian idea of the dragon, the hero going in and slaying the dragon, and really confronting something here. Um, and, I love my father, I love my grandfather. They also had, all kinds of stuff that they were working through in their lives, whether they knew it or not. And I don't know, as a young American kid, it was this thing of wanting to understand, why are you choosing that path? I want to understand so I can better know how I can heal and help others to find that healing too, um, without having any answers really. A good friend said, good art asks questions. And so with all of this stuff, it's sort of challenging all of us to step into a critical state of thought, as opposed to just a passive, like, hands-off attitude,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like it's a bit evocative and ambiguous. It allows people to read more into it, project their own meanings onto things.
Yes, yes. And that goes back to the idea of sharing stories. It's like with House of Stone, by leaving it open-ended and very open source, the hope was that others would take those archetypes of characters and fill it with their own um, life experience. And that's one of the exciting things that's happened with the work is over the years I've had people fly me to different places where they've written an entire ballet or a backstory based on their ancestry. And that stuff has left me beside myself because that's the goal in my mind. I certainly have a literal narrative. There's languages, there's all this stuff, but um, I'm more interested in how we can take that and pass it around and see what comes out of it.
Do you mind talking about what the narrative is for
Hmm.
the House of Stone series a bit for anybody that's listening that's not
Yeah,
as
sure.
familiar?
So, um, in short, House of Stone is actually one of four stories that all happen in this circle of time. And the idea was that it could be a future America that's been broken down to a city state, almost like, the House of Savoy in Italy.
Mm.
It could be a distant past. It could be a parallel dimension. I never really wanted to get too literal with where I was sitting in time. But the story begins with the death of the father at the hands of the two oldest sons. Um, the narrative is centered around this family who are villains and terrors to the rest of the world, like the Hussein family would have been in Iraq. And House of Stone is literally a collective of people who have, when chaos reigned, pulled away from the rest of the world and created their own society based on ideals that they feel were lost. And 500 years after that collective of people find this place in the desert and build up this fortress, our story begins. And in short, it's these five children of this guy, after he dies, coming together to defend their house against the outside invading force. And so the whole story, the father figure is painted by way of the memories of these five children. Um, and when I began working on it, I was really interested in looking at life through the eyes of the villain, and with the intention that we question what is good and evil, what is right or wrong. Is there a good or a bad side here? I started working on it in 2001. Really, the first story that's not House of Stone, I started in 1998. Um, House of Stone really came in around 2001, and that was because my grandfather died. Uh, and and so each of these characters have their own set of issues that they're working through as they're moving through the series of days leading up to this final conflict. Uh, you could liken it to a Battle of the Alamo, where they're outnumbered 20 to 1 or something, but still fighting with every ounce of strength to defend this house that has been built up by their forefathers. Um, and so that work spans 6 records. The idea was to release it in 5 chapters. Originally, the idea was that each volume was the same story being told from the perspective of one of the kids,
Mm.
so that the chronology of the narrative is kind of braided together in this really beautiful way, where more of it's revealed from the different perspectives as they're moving through. Um, so you can see all of that. It's all up on my website, sorn.com, and I have a link under the music. There's a piece of visual art and story with each song, like an opera. Yeah, it was like my take on a folk opera. And you can listen along and read the narrative, and so I have that all up online.
Mm. It's always felt to me like the story is set sort of post-apocalyptic, like
Hmm.
after the fall of some kind of civilization and in the ruins of
Yes,
the civilization or something.
yes, and I love that idea. In many ways, it felt like I was looking at what was happening around September 11 and thinking, 1,000 years ahead, what does America look like in the year 3000? Um,
Wow.
and playing with that, it's like when I envisioned what these people were wearing, the way that the environment looked, it was like Frankenstein amalgamations of the detritus of old cultures,
Hmm.
like we see throughout history in other civilizations, the beautiful melting pot of ideas, to lead to this new interpretation of life as we see it. Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
Yeah, I think your music also has this kind of perennial style to it where it's hard to pin it down to a particular genre. It has elements perhaps of like rock or pop music, but then it's also very classical and very tribal as well. It
yes,
reminds me of like Native American chanting or
sure.
something like that. And it has a real ritual component to it. And I'm very curious about where that comes from for you. Do you have a lot of personal inclinations towards ritual and spirituality and shamanism and things like that?
I think, I my family grew up Christian, and the first churches that we were in where they're speaking in tongues and casting out demons and all that. Um, and it was terrifying, and it was beautiful, and it was awe-inspiring because you saw the beauty of humankind coming together in this thing, speaking in tongues and the laying of hands. All of that to me felt very human. Um, whatever branding of if you're going to put Jesus on it or Muhammad, I mean, when people are gathered together, something really magnetic happens, I think. And
Mm.
so I'm not ashamed of my Christian ancestry. It's like that's the language I was given. And so I pull up from that and process a lot of that, especially in the symbolism of the story, as a person who at 13 was like, you know what, I don't need this technology anymore. Thank you for all that you gave me, but now I want to seek God in other ways. Um, the whole thing was also an active practice of working through that stuff that was ingrained in me as a child. So the ritualistic aspects of it was like, okay, I'm doing this thing, but where does it come from? Digging deeper into, the tribal aspects of music making. You're listening to a lot of folk music from Africa or Japan or China, the Middle East. They're doing with their voices to evoke these emotional lines of energy. Um, it's playing with all of that stuff in a way that, again, it's like, does this feel true? Like a good acting performance. Am I authentically pulling from this emotive point? And so a lot of that stuff happens intuitively. Oh man, yeah, that's scratching that psychic itch right there. I'm going to keep doing that again and again and again. And the circle of that being a part of that whole, it's like I think of pulling, a ball of yarn apart to make the line straight again. It's like untangling all of this uh, mental uh, thought processes,
Mm.
um, emotional thought processes. So, and again, going back to the idea of taking all influences and seeing what comes of it, I want to add to the conversation with music. I love rock. I love opera. I love folk music. I love all of it. You know, Either it moves me or it doesn't. And so rather than fight that stuff, it's like, no, I mean, let's see what we can do with that. How can we make something that feels like an addition to the musical conversation? And what's cool about that is it's an ongoing evolution. And I've had a number of people, there were two musicologists in the last couple of years now saying that I have created a new genre, um, which wasn't my intention. It was like, no, I'm trying to zero in on what this thumbprint looks like or sounds like. Not after trying to create something new, as just create something that's mine.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you know the work of Ernst Fuchs, the visual artist
who
from
is it?
Ernst Fuchs?
Oh
He
yeah,
was,
yes, yes. He does those
yeah,
beautiful pieces that are kind of reminiscent of so,
he was like the godfather of visionary art. His work has a lot of like hermetic and alchemical themes in it, and he
right.
explored a lot of Christian symbolism. But amazing painter. But he was after what he called the hidden prime of styles. So he
Mm,
was going through all these different cultural histories of art and studying them. So the Mayans and the classical artists from Western culture and
Yes.
Asian art and all that, and trying to like find the thread that was consistent through all of them and distill that. And I
Yeah.
feel like in some ways you're doing something similar musically. It's like you're
Mm,
finding the commonalities behind all these different genres of music, and
right.
you're not genre bashing. You know, it's not like you're like not like making jazz rock, you know, but you found a way to kind of find the commonalities between all those different types of music and just
Yes.
explain that.
Yes. I feel like it's an act of listening, and it's an act of reverence and respect for that which people have done before. Um, yeah, I think the first time I saw his work, it really resonated so deeply. Um, and I think it was H.R. Giger inspired by him.
They were friends, yeah.
Okay, because it felt like all those guys perhaps were kind of a certain era, or that
They
like
were,
the way
yeah.
you have Cubists who all kind of came up together. Um, but yeah, um, in many ways, it's that thing of the we can either destroy or we can create. And not that there's a duality. I mean, that's a complicated statement. Sometimes creation is destructive, but the answer to, in my mind, the key to living and not just surviving is the act of creation. Um, taking that which has been established and working from it. All the great movements in the arts have come out of that. Cultural waves of influence come from taking what has come and then pushing it a little bit further or in a different direction, reacting against it. Uh, yeah,
Yeah. I'm, I would consider your music to be quite dark in a way. Like it seems to relate mostly to these emotions of shame and vulnerability and tragedy and grief and things like that. And I was reading this book called Power versus Force by David Hawkins. He talks about how you can use kinesiology to basically qualify different levels of art or food, even whatever it is, and that more transcendent or exalted types of music are kind of more strengthening for the body, and other kinds of music. He actually says that heavy metal is destructive for the energy system and stuff like that, which I'm not sure. I've always been really attracted to dark, ominous, kind of cathartic
hmm
music, but I'm curious just what you think about that, and if you consider the impact of the kinds of emotions that you're stirring on your audience when you're
sure.
creating music.
Well, the stuff that I do, it's all coming from an intuitive itch that needs to be scratched. And it feels like that's the stuff that in the psycho-spiritual diet has been absent in the same way that, you know, in the American diet, there's there's a huge deficit in, again, thinking back to how we've seen organics and things like that come up and everything. It was addressing what was missing on the plate.
Mm.
And what I do, I don't really even consider it dark. I mean, I've always been drawn to the subconscious. I've been drawn to things that are dark only because of the fact that it's like, oh man, that's the stuff that's missing. I want to know more
Mm.
about that. When that's satiated, sure, I'll do something else. Um, and there's a lot of interesting study on the effects of music. I was telling another person I was talking with about a friend of mine. His name is Walter Werzowa. And he has a program called Health Tunes. It's free. You can sign up for it. And what he's done is he's donated the last 25 years of his life to creating music and sound that addresses mental and emotional and physical health. So with Health Tunes, you can look for therapies that address Alzheimer's or PTSD or sleep issues, anxiety, and you use them as you would, take a medicine, like on a prescription basis, prescription. Um, and his aim was always to put nutrition labels on albums, which I thought was pretty neat. There's another great book called Harmonies of Heaven and Earth, where this guy, oh man, Jocelyn Godwin. He gets into the mystic aspects of music, what people throughout antiquity believed about particular key signatures, chord progressions, melodic intervals, the idea of singing the octaves, oh, 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 being this thing of exercising what they called the spiritus. Um, in the church, you had certain chords that were considered devil chords, where, you
Yeah.
know, you're not supposed to touch that. But, going back to this idea of doing the homework, I think it's important for all of us to really look into what the effects of music are really doing. And once again, the stuff for me was just intuitively scratching an itch. It was like, this actually feels good for my spirit. I feel lighter after I exercise this thing. And what I saw beginning to happen at live shows was people coming, like the last couple of years, people had coming up to me telling me they've had chronic pain that has gone away. Like, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. Because what I'm after is really to create stuff that feels good and true. Um, and so like, blues or jazz music, specifically this, when I think about blues, it was a thing of actually writing to release, and rather than hold in. And I think so much of the time we're taught we got to hold it in, no, don't let it out. But really what it's doing is it's crying out the tears and the sickness. So darkness, I don't know. Um, it feels necessary.
Mm.
And I also take great care and responsibility for what it is that I'm putting out into the world. Because, yeah, I've heard things about that with metal music or like country, in Harmonies of Heaven and Earth, he talks about in India, um, they're, using classical music, specifically certain fugues that have particular time signatures and tempos that make the plants grow faster. If you want to kill plants, you blast country or, rock. And I'm not here claiming that that's true or not, but it's interesting. Um, it's worth researching, and that's the stuff I like to have in the conversations about. Uh, but I know, what was it, Beethoven's fourth or fifth, they began using it in medical wards and ERs for infants and soldiers with PTSD, because the tempo of that particular piece of music is the same rhythm as the human biorhythm.
Wow.
So what they started seeing happening is that they pumped it through the speakers in these hospitals, it would calm everyone and get everybody to actually be able to heal and keep the kids from, crying and sleeping better and all that. I took one piece that Walter gave me that, and these two, a lot of the stuff he's giving me is it's like a hum or it sounds like a low tonal vibration. You can put it with a piece of pre-existing music and it works the same way. But he gave me this one piece that was at a particular frequency, and my mother and her siblings are all sitting around at this house in South Florida, and they're all kind of chattery and anxious. And I just hit play, and the whole room got quiet.
Mm.
And I just sitting there with this stupid grin on my face, and my Aunt Angela was like, "What is that lovely sound?" Uh, and I told them all and got them all to sign up for Health Tunes. um, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think you probably know a lot more about music history than I do, but I remember hearing, I think it was Romantic era composers that started using scales that were previously unused or kind of forbidden. And they had
Right.
like Yiddish minor scales and things like that that were
Yeah.
like very frightening to
Mm.
people. And after certain Beethoven symphonies, people would like riot in the streets and things like that. Is that true?
Oh, I mean, there's plenty of those stories. Uh, yeah, you think about, the paradigm of thought when you push outside of that, what it can do, like how terrifying it is to, um, and I would argue that a lot of these people, I don't know specifically about some of these stories. Of course, I've heard a few. Um, you're breaking through a construct of thought that has been established, and that's always a scary thing. or at least it can be. I think it was Stravinsky's Rite of Spring when they premiered that. Everybody was so offended that they rioted and ripped the chairs out.
Jeez.
Yeah. Um, the composer, he's still alive. He's actually one of my favorite influences, Arvo Pärt.
Oh, I love Arvo Pärt's music. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. He's of this era, talking about a collective of musicians who are or artists who are kind of on a similar tip. Him and Philip Glass and Stephen Reich are all of that holy minimalism movement. But he talked about how sound can kill, which I agree with. I think, you know, there's blasting Red Hot Chili Peppers, Sugar Sex Magic, or whatever in a prisoner of war camp. I think that they were using that in Guantanamo Bay or something. Don't quote me on that. But things like that, or like, the Waco incident where the FBI were trying to get into David Koresh's compound, or, blasting these pieces of music that they figured out can drive somebody crazy when you just play it on repeat. um, yeah. And I feel like we barely know anything about the real effects of sound on the body. We're still kind of really delving into that. And musically, I think looking ahead, that's where I'm at too. Is uh, I want to deepen my knowledge of the physiological effects that music does have. Um, but the only way to do that is to try and to keep trying
Hmm.
and to keep trying and listen and pay attention and do more homework and dig deeper. Um,
But I think your music has a lot of vulnerability to it, though. It's not aggressive. It may be sad at times, but it takes those buried, unconscious emotions and it sort of brings them up into the light
yeah.
and finds transcendence through that. I remember one of your vocal workshops, you said something like, "We'll use our tears to grow the flowers of our creativity," or
hmm
something like that.
That's the alchemy of suffering. It's the one thing I really feel is an opportunity with suffering. We each have it, and I firmly believe that it's a misstep to try to compare one's suffering to another. For whatever reason, we've each been given our bag, and we can either carry it around like a burden, or we can take it and work with it. And I think that's what taking the tears and watering the flowers is really about for me personally, is that thing of I want to alchemize this stuff that I was given. I want to choose to see it as an opportunity, as a gift to create something beautiful out of it. What can be done with it? Can something be done with it? And vulnerability is such a powerful thing. We often mistake vulnerability for weakness. But on the other side of that, I really believe that it's in our vulnerability that we're the most uh, powerful. If we can embrace that, it's that thing of the more you release your guard, the more you are held. Um, I think the actress Dame Judi Dench said the best actors are the most vulnerable and insecure ones. Uh, and that's what I think that I really believe that's what we are so inspired by with the true greats that are putting themselves on stage and just in that state. If you hear Janis Joplin and the way she would just belt her pain, or Nina Simone, you know, bridling that anger and belting it out, or Billie Holiday, letting those beautiful, sad tinged notes come fluttering out. These are people who are in touch with that. Um,
Mm,
yeah. So it's
beautiful.
like it's just paying attention to that and doing that's what feels true. That's what feels good. I grew up on the stage. My parents were amateur actors and singers, and so they put me on the stage as a young kid with different productions that they were a part of. So all of this stuff was very much innately a part of my upbringing. Um,
Mm.
but you can start at any time.
Yeah, it's never too late. There's been a lot of great
Definitely.
artists that started quite late in their lives,
Oh
remarkably.
yeah, the filmmaker Akira Kurosawa made The Seventh Samurai when he was 50.
Yeah,
I
there
think
you go.
it's right. Um,
Yeah. We have about maybe 8 minutes left. I wanted to ask you, what do you wish that you knew when you were first getting started? Like, if you could give advice to yourself at the beginning of your career, what would you say?
oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Um, Maybe don't worry so much. I don't know. That the worry and anxiety, certainly fuels and has fueled the work. Um, I got really, when I really got started, I was in Florida finishing up the arts program and kind of kept moving west. Maybe it was, one of my mentors gave me the advice. He wrote in one of like an art catalog, if you hold back, you stay back. And maybe that's what it is. Like when I think about the first time I came to Los Angeles, I knew this is where I need to be. And so much of my life has been this thing of being very timid. I'm a very shy person by nature. But those times where I took a deep breath and I just put myself out there, I saw something beautiful happen. I think back to high school, the first time I auditioned for a musical and how terrified I was, but I stood up and I sang this. I think it was a piece from the musical Godspell that I had learned for when I was in it years prior. And it just totally won the room. And I didn't think it would do that at all. I was like, God, I'm about to embarrass myself. So maybe that's it. Maybe that goes in line with don't worry so much. Maybe it's that thing of like, don't hold back. If you feel, I don't know, and I'm speaking to Morgan here. I can't speak for anybody else, but um, putting myself out there more, probably something along those lines. Fearless, be fearless. That was another one. It was like when I think back to the mentors that I earned in those days, they were such fearless people. Uh, and that was something I needed. I needed people who embodied fearlessness. So even when I go to perform, I'll think about Phyllis Strauss and that woman and how fearless she was, and how every time I went to go see her, I left her office feeling like I could walk on water. Uh, or Jim Roche, the other fellow who wrote "If You Hold Back, You Stay Back." I mean, people who just they didn't give a fuck about what anybody thought. They spoke the thing that they felt like a fire that they had to release. Then at that point, it's left to us to interpret it as we will. But yeah, maybe it's that thing of yeah, don't hold back.
Mm. Do you ever get sort of, I don't know, anxiety before performing?
Oh gosh, every time, yeah. It's like if I don't feel that way at this point, I get worried. It's like you know, that's a sign of the fact that I'm very present in that moment. And so
Mhm.
usually I'll take a deep breath and just sort of center in and think about the people that embody the thing that I need to kind of help to tether a little bit. And I'll be honest, it doesn't always work. Sometimes I go into a thing of frazzled mess, but within a few minutes I can wrangle it and then ride that wave. Um, but yeah, I can't think of a time where I didn't feel nervous before doing the thing.
Mm. That's reassuring. I think that you would look at somebody like yourself who's performed so many times and think that you just have this unshakable confidence, but it
Uh,
makes you more human.
yeah, I think maybe it's the desperation that I need to get something out that overrides the insecurity. But yeah, I remember in middle school too doing drama things, and this girlfriend of mine at the time like, you're never staged. I hate it. It's like you're never nervous. I'm like, the fuck I'm not. Terrified. But I think that's the other part of it too. It's like if that can be something that is a point of endearment with one another, where it's like, yeah, we're all fumbling through the dark here with shaking hands. It's okay. It's okay that it's not okay. Um, don't hold back. You know, let that thing out. Live desperately as if you're already dead.
Mm.
There's a great book called the Hagakure where it's the memoirs of this what was his name? Tetsumono. He was a samurai who wanted to commit seppuku when his lord died, but at that time in Japan's history, seppuku was outlawed. So instead, he's like, "All right, fuck this. I'm going to shave my head and become a monk." And that was his form of death. So in his last few years, there was a young samurai who went and was a scribe and just recorded like his musings, his stories about what he felt embodied true um, samurai nature or hagakure, which is to live desperately. It's a wonderful book to read. Um,
Mm.
and it's from the perspective of an old, crotchety, jaded samurai who's like, "Oh, these kids are, you know, they don't know what they're talking about." All these young samurai, they don't know what it means to be a real samurai. And there's moments in that book where I remember the tears hitting the page because it was so beautiful. You felt the guy's convictions, and it's from the perspective too of a Japanese man who's cast in that ideology. So a lot of girlfriends of mine, I've encouraged them to read it because I feel like it's important knowledge for all of us.
Mm.
Um, Something interesting to reflect on anyway.
Mm. Live desperately. Yeah, that's a nice thing to chew on.
Right? For me, it
I'm, af-
was. Yeah,
I'm
I
afraid
caught.
we're kind of coming down to the wire here. Probably about 1 or 2 minutes
Oh,
left.
okay. All right.
But yeah, thank you so much, man. It's a real honor to talk to you. I'm a big fan. Thanks for your time.
Oh, dude. Yeah, it's no doubt. Um, yeah, I'd love to do it again sometime. How
Yeah,
often are you doing these podcasts?
I'm doing them 4 times a week. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, we can definitely do this again another time in the coming months for sure. I intend to
Yeah.
keep doing it. So
Yeah. Let's do it. I
cool.
feel like right now it's a nice thing to be able to just, jump in and have these kinds of moments since we're here. Uh, and I'll definitely be doing more of the live streams myself.
Epic. Awesome. I look forward to it. Cool, man. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks for everybody who tuned in, for being such a good listening audience.
Nice to meet you, all of you
Yeah.
out there.
Be well,
It's good
man.
to
Nice
see
to
you
meet
again,
you
man.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise.
Much love.
Peace.
Zip. The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.